Welcome to the First Punic War, a charming little 23-year spa retreat of carnage, shipwrecks, and bureaucratic drama that pitted two superpowers against each other in a prolonged contest of who could suffer the most humiliating naval disasters. Let's start in 249 BC, a year when Rome thought, hey, maybe we could do boats now. Enter Publius Claudius Pulcher, Roman consul and proud graduate of the fake-it-till-you-sink-it school of naval command. Naturally, before leading his fleet into battle, he consulted the real brains of the operation, sacred chickens. These divine birds were supposed to give Rome a thumbs up or beak up for victory by eating grain. But they refused. Most commanders would see this as a divine no, not Pulcher. He scoffed at centuries of religious tradition, chucked the chickens overboard, and famously declared, if they won't eat, let them drink. Spoiler alert, the gods were not amused. The result? A Titanic-level disaster before icebergs were even trendy. Out of 123 Roman ships, 93 were sunk or captured by Carthaginian admiral at Hannibal, who apparently knew how boats work. Roughly 20,000 Roman sailors and marines were lost, and Pulcher secured his legacy as possibly the only man to lose a battle by offending poultry. Now let's zoom out. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, was less a war and more a never-ending, seaborne slap fight between Rome, the land-loving late bloomer, and Carthage, the nautical nerds of the Western Med. Rome had ambition and sheer audacity. Carthage had boats. Guess which mattered more in a naval war? Spoiler, Rome eventually won by simply refusing to quit and inventing the Corvus boarding bridge, aka a floating gangplank of doom. But one, here, is relative. Imagine burning billions of denarii to learn the basics of sailing after you start the war. By the time the dust, or sea spray, settled, Rome had muscled its way into Mediterranean dominance, with Carthage licking its wounds and quietly plotting part two. Thanks, Hannibal. Rome, now on a roll, bulldozed its way through the rest of the Greek world like it was clearing out a closing sale, achieving what can only be called the earliest version of a global empire. Not global like today, but certainly first. Meanwhile, poor Carthage, once mighty, mercantile, and full of potential, was so thoroughly crushed by the time of the Third Punic War that modern historians have to rely almost exclusively on Roman sources. Imagine if all your Yelp reviews were written by your bitter ex. That's Carthage's legacy. Oddly enough, Cold War strategists later saw value in these dusty scrolls of maritime disaster. While U.S. military academies devoured Thucydides to prep for nuclear chess with the Soviets, others dusted off Polybius, Rome's PR guy, to understand the real deal of great power conflict. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that controlling the sea matters. Also, don't insult chickens. So next time someone says, Rome wasn't built in a day, remind them, no, but its navy nearly sunk in one. The First Punic War, chickens, ships, and Mediterranean mayhem. Ah yes, the first global empire. Before iPhones, before pizza delivery, and even before Britain started collecting colonies like Pokemon cards, there was Rome. And before Rome ruled everything worth ruling, it had to take on a worthy adversary. Carthage, a Mediterranean powerhouse with salt in its veins and a navy that actually knew what the sea was for. Welcome to the First Punic War, a charming little 23-year spa retreat of carnage, shipwrecks, and bureaucratic drama that pitted two superpowers against each other in a prolonged contest of who could suffer the most humiliating naval disasters. Let's start in 249 BC, a year when Rome thought, hey, maybe we could do boats now. Enter Publius Claudius Pulcher, Roman consul and proud graduate of the fake-it-till-you-sink-it school of naval command. Naturally, before leading his fleet into battle, he consulted the real brains of the operation, sacred chickens. These divine birds were supposed to give Rome a thumbs up or beak up for victory by eating grain. But they refused. Most commanders would see this as a divine no, not Pulcher. He scoffed at centuries of religious tradition, chucked the chickens overboard, and famously declared, if they won't eat, let them drink. Spoiler alert, The gods were not amused. The result? A Titanic-level disaster before icebergs were even trendy. Out of 123 Roman ships, 93 were sunk or captured by Carthaginian admiral at Hannibal, who apparently knew how boats work. Roughly 20,000 Roman sailors and marines were lost, and Pulcher secured his legacy as possibly the only man to lose a battle by offending poultry. Now let's zoom out. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, was less a war and more a never-ending seaborne slap fight between Rome, the land-loving late bloomer, and Carthage, the nautical nerds of the Western Med. Rome had ambition and sheer audacity. Carthage had boats. Guess which mattered more in a naval war? Spoiler: Rome eventually won by simply refusing to quit and inventing the Corvus boarding bridge, aka a floating gangplank of doom. But one, here, is relative. Imagine burning billions of denarii to learn the basics of sailing after you start the war. By the time the dust, or sea spray, settled, Rome had muscled its way into Mediterranean dominance, with Carthage licking its wounds and quietly plotting part two. Thanks, Hannibal. Rome, now on a roll, bulldozed its way through the rest of the Greek world like it was clearing out a closing sale, achieving what can only be called the earliest version of a global empire. Not global like today, but certainly first. Meanwhile, poor Carthage, once mighty, mercantile, and full of potential, was so thoroughly crushed by the time of the Third Punic War that modern historians have to rely almost exclusively on Roman sources. Imagine if all your Yelp reviews were written by your bitter ex. That's Carthage's legacy. Oddly enough, Cold War strategists later saw value in these dusty scrolls of maritime disaster. While U.S. military academies devoured Thucydides to prep for nuclear chess with the Soviets, others dusted off Polybius, Rome's PR guy, to understand the real deal of great power conflict. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that controlling the sea matters. Also, don't insult chickens. So next time someone says Rome wasn't built in a day, remind them, no, but its navy nearly sunk in one. The First Punic War, how a bar fight in Sicily started a century of Mediterranean drama. The beginnings of the first global empire. Not with a bang, but with some mercenaries stealing a city and everyone overreacting like it's the season finale of an ancient soap opera. Let's rewind to 750 BC. Carthage is founded by Phoenicians from Tyre who clearly decided, hey, let's build a city where we can launch a seafaring business empire and corner the Mediterranean market in purple dye, silver, and smugness. By the time the 3rd century BC rolled around, Carthage was running a maritime empire that stretched from Spain's Atlantic coast to somewhere just shy of Leprechaun Land. Yes, they traded with Ireland. They were the shipping overlords of the West, basically the Amazon Prime of antiquity. Meanwhile, Rome, the up-and-coming land power with an ego bigger than its Senate, spent the 500s and 400s BC punching its way down the Italian peninsula like it was clearing a bar tab. Things were stable-ish. Rome and Carthage even got along. Carthage helped Rome in a previous war. Everybody was civil. It was all very diplomatic. And then came Messana, or as we should call it, the world's most expensive real estate dispute. In 264 BC, a bunch of Campanian mercenaries did what mercenaries do best, caused chaos. After the king of Messana died, classic, they staged a coup, seized the city, and immediately realized they had no idea how to run it. Naturally, they screamed for help. First to Carthage because navy, then to Rome because armies, essentially tossing an open invite to two superpowers like it was a toga party gone wrong. Carthage answered first, sent troops, parked their ships in the Messina Strait, the sea gate to Italy, and said, mine now. Rome, very chill and rational as always, saw this and sent 40,000 troops. Because nothing says measured response like dropping an entire army on a city you previously couldn't locate on a map. Then something unexpected happened. Syracuse, Carthage's longtime buddy, took one look at the Roman invasion and said, you know what? We're good, and switched sides faster than a reality TV contestant. That alliance would hold. mostly because Rome wasn't shy about threatening anyone who reconsidered. Carthage, never one to back down from overconfidence, responded by doing what it does best: naval raids. It hoped to woo southern Italy's Greek cities into defecting from Rome. The logic? We control the sea. What could go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. But Rome wasn't just here to help. No, Rome had that imperial sparkle in its eye. It quickly realized that if they left Sicily in Carthaginian hands, their new allies would be toast. Plus, conquest sounded fun. So, the mission evolved from rescue to annex everything not nailed down. And here's where it gets good. Rome wasn't just stubborn. It was borderline unhinged in its persistence. Carthage had spent centuries trying to fully absorb Sicily. Rome looked at their decades of effort and said, "Hold my wine." In 262 BC, the Romans grabbed Messana, then smashed Carthaginian forces at Agrigentum. Rome was winning, kind of, but there was a problem: boats. Carthage had them. Rome did not. As in, not really. Sicily's terrain was perfect for guerrilla warfare and awful for large-scale maneuvering. Carthage's generals mastered the noble art of lose the battle, win the retreat, retreating to coastal cities and daring Rome to come get them by sea. Rome's solution to this nautical conundrum? Build a fleet from scratch. Because when you're trying to become the first global empire, why let inexperience or basic naval knowledge stop you? Thus began one of history's most awkward, resource-draining, and clumsy attempts at maritime warfare. And yet, somehow, it worked. Eventually. So to summarize, Carthage had the boats. Rome had the audacity. Sicily had the bad luck of being located between them. The First Punic War was a Mediterranean tug-of-war over an island that neither side could properly hold, but both refused to give up. What began as a minor dispute over Messana would spiral into a multi-decade slap fight for dominance, and set the stage for Rome's transformation into the first global empire. Coming up next, how Rome learned to sail by sinking a lot. The First Punic War. Rome builds a fleet, aka the greatest fake-it-till-you-make-it in naval history. If you were a Carthaginian admiral in the 3rd century BC, there were a few things you didn't worry about: Roman sailors, Roman ships, or the Roman navy, because none of them existed. Rome was a land power. It conquered things by marching on them and stabbing them, not by floating toward them on lumber and hoping for the best. Enter the First Punic War, where Rome suddenly realized that to win an island war, you occasionally need boats. Ancient naval strategy wasn't just about dramatic sea battles and cool rammed hulls. It was about logistics, moving armies, protecting trade routes, keeping the enemy from getting snacks, or stuff. But executing this required something Rome didn't have: ships, sailors, or any idea what they were doing. Meanwhile, Carthage, with its centuries-old maritime tradition, sat comfortably on its sea throne, giggling at the idea that Rome might try to paddle out and pick a fight. Why worry? Rome at sea was like a goat in a swimming pool, confused, panicking, and highly likely to drown. But Rome, blessed with that signature mix of audacity and wildly misplaced confidence, shrugged off its total inexperience and went, how hard could ships be? As Polybius, Rome's ancient fanboy/historian, put it, the Romans built a fleet without so much as a preliminary trial, which is ancient historian code for they had absolutely no idea what they were doing. Their secret weapon? Reverse engineering, aka history's earliest case of naval plagiarism. A Carthaginian quinquereme conveniently ran aground near Messana. Rome scooped it up like a free IKEA sample, took it apart, studied it, and essentially said, cool, we'll just copy this. Voila. The Roman fleet was born, not out of naval heritage, but out of sheer opportunism and frantic improvisation. Now, building ships is one thing. Sailing them is another. Rome, aware that its sailors were about as seaworthy as a sack of bricks, decided to bring the land to the sea. Enter the Corvus, a massive boarding bridge with a nasty spike underneath, like a medieval diving board designed by a very angry engineer. The idea was simple. If we can't sail better, let's just turn naval battles into land battles on boats. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, this brilliant insanity actually worked. Roman ships hooked onto Carthaginian vessels with the corvus, boarded them, and transformed the clash into a floating brawl, Roman style. The result? Rome's first major naval victory, which no one, especially Carthage, saw coming. And just like that, the first global empire took its first steps off the beach. Rome repeated this corvus-fueled chaos at Sulci, 258 BC, and Tyndaris, 257 BC, like a bad sequel with the same plot but slightly better special effects. Carthage, to its horror, realized that Rome, the landlubbers from central Italy, had gone full ship mode and were now beating them at their own salty game. So to recap, Rome went from zero fleet to sea beast in under a decade. They learned naval warfare the Roman way, by cheating, copying, stabbing, and innovating with dangerously heavy bridges. Carthage learned that legacy naval supremacy means nothing when the other guy duct tapes a battlefield to the deck of a boat. And thus, brick by plank, battle by ridiculous boarding maneuver, Rome began shaping what would eventually become the first global empire, proving once again that nothing is more dangerous than a determined empire with no clue what it's doing. Yet, the First Punic War. How not to win a war with 600 ships and some dead chickens. So, Rome had boats now, and surprisingly, they hadn't all sunk. Yet. But even after a few flashy naval victories, the eternal struggle for Sicily wasn't going anywhere. Carthage was still hanging on like a barnacle that just refused to be scraped off. Naturally, both sides did what any rational state would do: dump absurd amounts of money into building even more ships. Naval arms race? Check. By 256 BC, Rome decided to escalate things. Not by winning in Sicily, oh no, but by going straight for Carthage's home turf, North Africa. Because when you're frustrated by your enemy's island bases, clearly the best move is to invade their homeland, right? Two consuls, Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manius Vulso Longus, named straight from the too many syllables department, loaded up 330 Roman warships and 26,000 legionnaires like it was a transmediterranean field trip. Carthage caught wind and wasn't amused. They assembled an even bigger fleet of 350 ships, resulting in a 680-ship pileup off Cape Ecnomus, aka the largest naval battle in history, Ancient Edition, starring nearly 290,000 sailors and marines who probably didn't know what they were doing. The battle was, to put it professionally, a complete nautical circus. But somehow, through sheer Roman stubbornness and maybe a little divine chicken karma, Rome won and landed in North Africa. They even captured Apsus and began inching toward Carthage like it was a slow-motion horror movie. But wait, Carthage had a surprise twist. Enter Xanthippus, a Spartan mercenary who showed up like a DLC character and absolutely wrecked the Romans. He sent their invasion packing, captured Regulus, who might have regretted going to Africa, and restored Carthaginian hopes. Still, Rome doesn't take LS without dramatic flair. They sent a fleet to rescue the survivors, beat Carthage again at Cape Hermium, and were feeling pretty smug, until Mother Nature decided otherwise. On the trip home, the fleet, including 464 ships, got caught in a massive storm. Result? 384 ships lost, 100,000 plus dead, and a floating disaster of epic proportions. The likely culprit? The corvus, Rome's brilliant invention for winning sea battles, now acting like an anchor during storms. Lesson learned? Nope. Rome did what Rome always does. Built more ships, another 220, because why not? Meanwhile, Carthage launched a bold move, burning Agrigentum to the ground in 254 BC. Rome countered by laying siege to Panormus, modern Palermo, slowly taking over the western part of Sicily. But Carthage stubbornly held onto the key ports of Lilybaeum and Drepana, relying on their still competent navy to supply and defend them, despite Rome's best efforts at naval blockades, which were basically nautical wishful thinking. Then came 249 BC, the legendary Battle of Drepana, where Commander Poultry Pitcher Claudius Pulcher, famously threw sacred chickens overboard for refusing to snack before battle. The result? A nighttime naval disaster. Pulcher's fleet scattered in the dark, and Carthaginian Admiral Hannibal capitalized like a pro, pinning Rome against the shore and smashing them. Rome, never content with one humiliation per month, followed up with another loss at Fintius. And to really drive the point home, as the Romans limped away, another storm obliterated the rest of their fleet, because apparently Poseidon was firmly Team Carthage. By this point, Carthage once again ruled the seas, and Rome's ships were somewhere at the bottom of the Mediterranean, forming an artificial reef. But here's the kicker. Carthage did nothing. With the seas wide open and Rome licking its wounds, they parked most of their navy, threw it into storage, and went back to occasional coastal raiding. Tactical brilliance meets strategic laziness. Carthage had all the advantages and used them to chill. And so, the war dragged on. Rome would wait 7 years to rebuild another fleet, while Carthage proved that even a master of the seas can flunk Empire 101. Thus, the first global empire inched closer, not because Rome was always brilliant, but because Carthage was spectacularly bad at following up on its wins. The First Punic War, endgame of the war that wouldn't die. From 248 to 243 BC, the First Punic War entered what historians politely call a stalemate, and what most people would call a 5-year Mediterranean staring contest. On land, things devolved into petty raids and guerrilla ambushes, the kind of warfare that kept Roman generals annoyed and sweaty, but not particularly victorious. Meanwhile, Carthage, still clinging to a shred of optimism, convinced itself that Rome had to be exhausted. Surely they quit soon, right? Maybe sue for peace. Maybe stop rebuilding fleets after losing thousands of men and ships to storms, battles, and bad omens? Wrong. Rome, professional overachievers and part-time masochists, responded by going full DIY Navy again. Despite being bankrupt, bled dry, and held together with IOUs and hope, the Roman Senate scraped together private donations to build yet another fleet, 200 more quinqueremes, because why not? This time, Rome got smarter. They ditched the Corvus, realizing that while it was great for stabbing enemy ships, it also turned their boats into floating anvils during storms. With the spiked bridge gone, Roman ships were faster, sleeker, and actually maneuverable. Even better, they found yet another enemy ship to copy. Because if you're going to become the first global empire, you may as well pirate your way there. Carthage, feeling the pressure, frantically threw together a new fleet as well. But instead of preparing for war, they packed their ships with supplies and planned a leisurely pickup of land troops, basically treating the fleet like a ferry service. Bad move. On March 10, 241 BC, near the Aegates Islands, the now professional Roman navy pounced on the unsuspecting Carthaginians like a pack of very salty wolves. Carthage, disorganized and overloaded, got absolutely wrecked. The Romans, once mocked as sea amateurs, now dished out a masterclass in naval dominance. Rome had become the very thing Carthage feared, a sea power. Though Carthage still held Lilybaeum and Drepana, they knew the jig was up. They waved the white flag and signed the Treaty of Lutatius, promising to evacuate Sicily, hand over all prisoners, and pay Rome a generous, we're sorry fee of 3,200 talents, aka 81 tons of silver, enough to fund a small empire or a weekend in Monaco. Aftermath. How to win, lose, and still win again. Technically, Rome won the First Punic War. They got Sicily, their first overseas territory, the gateway to the first global empire. But calling it a victory is like saying you won a marathon by crawling across the finish line with both legs broken. Let's talk numbers. Rome lost 700 quinqueremes. Carthage lost 500. Tens of thousands died in battle, and even more drowned in storms or died from disease. The Roman census dropped by 140,000 citizens between 263 and 243 BC, and that didn't even count poor folk and non-citizen allies. Some estimates put the true loss at over 500,000. Yes, that's ancient World War I energy. But wait, it gets better. Carthage, despite losing, actually came out stronger at first. They expanded across North Africa, secured Libya, and then set their sights on Spain, where they started building a shiny new empire powered by silver mines and spite. With Spanish treasure chests pouring in, they paid off Rome's indemnity early, then used the leftover cash to prep for round two. That would come in 218 BC, a little thing called the Second Punic War, starring Hannibal, some elephants, and a lot of Roman panic. But the real winner? Rome's navy. From zero to maritime hero, Rome had now built over 1,000 war galleys, mastered naval warfare, trained professional sailors, and laid the foundation for 6 centuries of Mediterranean domination. This was the true beginning of the first global empire, forged not just in the blood and sand of Italy, but on the waves, where Rome taught itself to sail, fight, and win repeatedly after catastrophic failure and chicken-related misjudgments. The First Punic War, lessons in how to win a war you were never supposed to win. If you're looking for neat modern parallels like Rome is China or Carthage is America, go ahead and close your scroll. The ancient world didn't have satellite reconnaissance, aircraft carriers, or press briefings. But if you dig a little deeper, the First Punic War still drops some spicy strategic truth bombs, especially for anyone who thinks sea power is just about ships and swagger. Let's start here. Rome had no business winning this war. Carthage had the navy, the experience, the coastal bases, and the maritime monopoly. Rome had farmers who could march and apparently swim if properly motivated. And yet, Rome won. Not because they were better at sea. Spoiler. They weren't, but because they were relentlessly, almost pathologically committed to becoming a sea power. In short, when you want to build the first global empire, you don't just show up with muscle. You show up with shipyards, money, stubbornness, and a willingness to learn on the fly while everything's on fire. Lesson 1. Geography isn't destiny. Resolve is. Carthage thought its navy and history guaranteed dominance. Rome saw its own inadequacies and said, let's build a fleet. From scratch. Multiple times. Carthage assumed the Romans would collapse from exhaustion. Instead, the Romans sent another invoice to the Senate and built 200 more ships, funded by donations. Imagine GoFundMe launching a fleet. Moral of the story? Assumptions sink faster than ships. Lesson 2. Sea power isn't about boats, it's about commitment. The First Punic War wasn't just about ship-on-ship violence. It was about who stayed in the game. Rome kept showing up after defeats, disasters, divine chicken misinterpretations, and hurricanes that made Poseidon question his methods. Meanwhile, Carthage blinked. They had the upper hand near the end. All they had to do was lean in, build more ships, press their advantage. But instead, they scaled back their navy, parked their fleet like it was off-season, and gave Rome a nice, breezy window to dominate. Oops. Lesson 3. Adapt or die. Sometimes literally. Carthage had better ships, smarter admirals, trained crews, and an edge that should have lasted. But Rome adapted. They copied enemy tech, thanks to that one unlucky grounded Carthaginian ship, invented tools like the Corvus, and then, when that tool nearly drowned them all, had the sense to throw it overboard, literally and strategically. Rome didn't just fight the war, they evolved through it. Lesson 4. The ocean is unforgiving, and so is Rome. Let's not forget the true MVP of the First Punic War, the weather. Storms wiped out entire fleets on 3 separate occasions. But Rome kept rebuilding. Why? Because they understood something Carthage forgot. Control of the sea is the price of power. And if you can't stomach that price, someone else will buy the empire instead. Lesson 5. Don't let your legacy become a cautionary tale. Carthage was the Mediterranean's original maritime king. But when Rome showed up and decided to take the sea seriously, Carthage hesitated. They thought it was just a phase, like a teenager buying a guitar. But Rome didn't just play, it toured. It conquered. And eventually, it became the sea power Carthage used to be. Sound familiar? For decades, Western strategists looked at China's navy and said, they're just a brown water force. Then China built ship after ship, and now it has one of the largest navies on Earth. History doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely sends warning shots. Final thought: build it or be conquered by it. Carthage lost more than a war. It lost its future because it hesitated to maintain dominance. Building a navy is hard. Keeping it requires strategy, sacrifice, and constant reinvestment. Rome understood that. Carthage didn't. And that's how a landlocked, late-blooming republic laid the foundations of the first global empire, by taking to the sea, staying there, and never letting go.